Hello, great ones. Welcome to the Live and Be Great podcast. I'm your host, Latanya Sampson McDonald. I am a life coach and a registered marriage and family therapist associate. And this podcast was created to motivate, educate, and inspire all to live and be great. On today's episode, I want to talk to you all about trauma. When it starts, how to recognize it, and what you can do to begin to heal from it. I chose this topic because I think many people underestimate the power that traumatic events in our lives affect the decisions we make daily and our perception of the world. I talk a lot about permission in conjunction with trauma, and I want this episode to empower you to give yourself permission to address your trauma and heal from it. Now let's start off by defining what trauma is. Trauma in the dictionary is defined as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. Now, I know from my own experience, I, as well as many other people, believed at one time that trauma began once you can talk and understand what you're saying and you're able to articulate your thoughts. Can you experience trauma? So let's say that's around maybe like 4 or 5 years old. Pet dies, a loved one goes away, our first day of school after being home for so long can be traumatic, right? But what many don't know, and I didn't know until I started going after my master's degree in psychology, that trauma actually can be felt and you can experience it while you're in the womb. For example, I've worked with clients from various different cultural backgrounds that experience or are battling, I should say, depression. And a lot of those clients have been battling depression since they were school age, 7, 8 years old. Now, these kids and the adults that I work with, you don't just wake up and all of a sudden you have depression, especially for the ones that started noticing symptoms at a very, very young age. 9 times out of 10, actually, I should say 10 times out of 10, when I would ask them about their experience with their parents and them asking their parents about what was happening around the time their mom was pregnant with them, you hear stories about, their mom maybe not being ready for a child, or their mom having to raise a child by themselves, or just not being able to afford a child. I have them ask their mom straight up, were they battling depression during that time? And 10 times out of 10, they were. So from early on, before you can even talk, before you even can open your eyes and breathe oxygen on this earth, you can experience trauma, and it can set the pace for your life. But what knowing about where it comes from, when it starts, how it's showing up in your life, that is often the key to your healing from it or your coping with it. What knowing about when your trauma started, what it does, when it shows up in your life does is be the key to healing from it. Recognizing your trauma is so important. Addressing it, I should say, is so important. And it can often be what is the make or break in your life. You know what? The person who just can't catch a break and the person that has it all but still feels like nothing has in common, it's trauma. What would it be like? Actually, I think many people have seen, like, there's so many celebrities that have overdosed, committed suicide out of nowhere. And these people were genuinely happy people. I mean, so you thought, based off of how they showed up in the world. And then they're out of here. And people often don't see it coming. Not addressing the trauma and healing from it, anyone can end up there, getting to the point where all you've worked for, you've put your trauma behind you, kind of just like tucked it away and, put on this facade as if it doesn't affect you. Yet that trauma could be the reason why you can't stay faithful to their spouse, or the person who is cutthroat in the office and always trying to achieve something, or the person that is always trying to look perfect in front of everybody, but deep down, like, none of these things are filling that void that they have. That is unresolved and unaddressed trauma. You try to find superficial things that society deems as successful, or boost your ego based off of what society determines as having it all and having it all together and everything going good for you. That's what happens. Trauma, unaddressed trauma. So it's important that you recognize it, you address it, you use it as fuel to motivate you, right? To look back and remember what you've gotten through, not just gotten over, but gotten through, because it's more important to get through and work through what you do so that the cycle doesn't continue. So you don't end up with everything you want, that $1 million house, or that house on the hill, or the family, and your favorite job, and everything you always wanted or thought you wanted or thought would bring you happiness. So you don't get there and feel like nothing. I promise you, I have so many stories about trauma and how it's affecting, or it has affected, people's lives. And it was my husband's, I have to thank him, his brilliant idea when I was trying to figure out how I would address this topic, to give you all like case studies and scenarios of trauma and the effects that it has. So, I could personalize this topic and help educate you guys in a relatable way so that you understand what it does and how it can benefit you to address it and heal from it. And I honestly think throughout the time doing this podcast, the Live and Be Great podcast, I really want genuine happiness, fulfillment, and inspiration to be what everyone who listens to this podcast gets out of it. But I cannot lead you astray by not truly giving you the tools that you need. And yes, maybe trauma can be looked at as that medicine or that scar or that wound that you don't want to acknowledge, that you just want to leave behind you and pretend like it didn't happen, like a lot of people do, or a lot of people have, honestly had to do to survive. But I truly want, when you get to where you're trying to go, I want you to truly be able to enjoy it and not have what happened to you destroy that. Like, I want you to heal and feel fulfilled and worthy of what you get and not just trying to constantly fill a void. So let's talk about my experience working in a high school, underprivileged high school. So if you can't tell by now, by looking at my picture, you can probably tell, you should be able to tell that I am a Black woman. And I don't want to place any stereotypes or statistics or anything like that. I just want to give you the truth from my experience. Working in an underprivileged neighborhood, a lot of the students didn't have access to therapy, but were constantly exposed to some sort of trauma, being in the neighborhood, be it gang violence, homelessness, not having a parent in the home or being in a foster care system, and of course, just regular family homes, you still experience trauma. If you got two parents that work and they work overtime based off of, because in California, it's very expensive. It's very expensive to live. So a lot of people are overworked and they don't necessarily have that time to truly sit down and check in with their child and their emotions because they're too busy trying to keep food on the table. And once you have a child, they become number one. So a lot of times you neglect yourself, and your child also gets the short end of the stick. A lot of people think, not just African American people, but a lot of people think, period, everyday working class citizens that have children and have a family, they have this perception of, okay, as long as I get you in school, have good grades, there's food on the table, there's clothes on your back, boom, I've done my job as a parent, but it's way, way more than that. And if more people really even took a look back at their childhood and what they lacked in emotional stability and learning how to be emotionally intelligent and fluid from their parents, and they could recognize how it showed up in their everyday life, we wouldn't have this problem of suicides, kids younger and younger becoming depressed and not knowing how to speak up for themselves. A lot of people like to diminish. Everybody knows what it was like to be a kid. A lot of people like to tell you you don't have real problems at that time. What are you crying for? But that's not the case. Like, you're still a human being and you experience maybe different traumas, but it's still trauma nonetheless, and it affects your brain and your perception of life and your emotions and how you deal with it, how you cope with it. It could be unhealthy, and that can be a constant cycle in your life, because when you don't address it, that parent often repeats the same cycle. They forgot how it was to be a child and experience what they experienced because they've been taught to dismiss it, that they didn't have an issue until they had to pay bills. But that's not the case. And in the high school, sorry if I'm rambling, but in the high school, I noticed that a lot of times people like to write those kids off in those underprivileged communities as if they had behavioral issues, they're just bad. They don't care. They're just lazy and things of that nature. And I noticed that even some of the educators there, and I won't give the name of the high school, I won't give the name of where it was at, but even some of the educators there had that perception of their own students and didn't even take the time to think, okay, why is it that you're always eating in my classroom? That could be the only meal that child had for the day based off of what their life has been like. A child that's always disruptive in the class. Why not pull their child outside at the end of class and, say what's going on? What's really happening, and not in a combative way, but in a compassionate way. I know that teachers actually, if you really look at it, they spend more time with children than their own parents can, depending on the situation. And usually that child that is acting out with a particular teacher, if it's not all teachers, for that day, that teacher is mom or that teacher is dad. And they are fighting for you to see them, somebody to see them. And instead of you writing them off and just dismissing them, treat them as humans, right? And then I don't want to just talk about it from a student's perspective, but also from the teacher's perspective. In a classroom that is overly populated, if you know anything about energy and like the high intensity, and in the neighborhood that a lot of these kids grow up in, and it may be gang infested, it just may be a lot of homelessness, a lot of trauma is around it. They're surrounded by trauma. And you're one teacher in a classroom, when you're in there, you feel all of that. You feel all of that. And a lot of teachers, they're not necessarily equipped to deal with all that trauma in one place. They don't even have systems set up for that teacher to have the education of what it is like to really teach, be able to teach, but also be someone that youth can lean on and trust, that is possibly dealing with depression, homelessness, abuse, some type of trauma. And you got two sets, from the teacher's perspective, from the child's perspective. You got the teacher one day just going off, flipping out. And you have two people that may have similar stories or have experienced trauma, but can't see each other because neither one has gotten the chance to just be and express themselves. Now, on the parent side, I've had students be afraid to even let their parents know that they're in therapy. I've had parents who, their child stopped talking to them and they put them in therapy, but yet they don't want to go to therapy. But 100 times out of 100, the parent is usually the link to whatever the child is going through emotionally. And for example, say we have a parent that is a single mother and her child used to be a straight A student, and all of a sudden, there was a death in the family, and the parent is just like, okay, well, that happened months ago. You should be fine. Whatever case may be, you're a straight A student, whatever. You got the latest Jordans, you got iPhone, you can get your hair done every 2 weeks, you should be good. Like, what's the issue? I've had, this has happened. This is, I'm picking from actual true stories, but I'm combining it into one. And my first thing that I do, right, is, I talk to the child about their experience at home. A lot of times, I got an uncle that's an alcoholic, my dad, he works too much, or mom, like let's say the grandmother died or the maternal grandfather died, and the relationship between, the child that I'm seeing and the grandparent that died was super strong, and the child tells me that the relationship between their grandparent and their mother or their father wasn't so good, right? A lot of times that resentment shows up in the parent and child relationship. And what I like to do, once I hear that, first thing I do is I want to connect with that parent, because the reason why they can't hear their child's pain is because their pain and what they went through as a child is screaming louder than anybody else's pain. So they can't see it, And I get that parent in my office and I ask them about their childhood. And 9 times out of 10, they immediately begin to cry when you ask the right question. Because what I do is I go ahead and connect the dots, because I've seen where, I was taught to be strong and to pick myself up and to keep going. Or, like I said earlier, the dismissal of your childhood emotions. If the parent is dismissing their child's depression, guaranteed that parent's depression was dismissed as well. Nobody gave them time to grieve or to feel, or gave that young version of that parent a chance to be heard. Now, once you unlock that door, now that 7-year-old version of that parent has a voice, they can now see where their child is coming from. And it works like magic every single time. So the truth of the matter is, hurt people hurt people. Like, that's usually what it is. It sounds cliche, for those who have heard it and, not really paid attention to it, but it's the truth. There's always a direct link. There's always a why. As therapists, we always have to be looking for the why you do it. Not that you do it, but why do you do it, in order to help our client, assist our clients, guide our clients to healing. Have to figure out the why. Okay, so let me give you another example. So say you come from a family of doctors, lawyers, prestigious, went to Ivy League schools, top of their class, and you got a child that decides that's not them. That's not what they want to do. They want to do something else. And their parent is threatening to disown them because they won't carry on the legacy. This story probably sounds familiar to you, a lot of you. Some of you probably lived it or are living it right now. And, so the child wants to do something else. They want to be an artist. They've seen how continuing the legacy based off of their own perception, watching their parent come home angry, seeing their parent maybe light up when music is playing, or if they see an art piece or they're dancing, like they see happiness there. But when it comes to work and carrying on the family legacy, they're like, they not happy. They have an attitude every time they come home. They barely spend any time with me, and I hate it. But I love art. I want to do this for the rest of my life. And that parent doesn't support their child. The reason for that is, and a lot of people think that their kids don't notice them. Your parent probably didn't think that. Like, they notice and they see a lot. And if they're seeing this so-called legacy destroy your happiness every day, your mood sucks, and you have an attitude anytime you think about work, and you're trying to push this on them, why would they want to do it? Because clearly it got pushed on that parent, because that parent isn't happy. They don't feel fulfilled in what they're doing. They just, did it because they were told, listen, being a doctor, being a lawyer, this means something in society, and we all did it, so you have to do it. Their voice was silenced, and because their voice was silenced and their wants and their needs were silenced, sometimes, like I said, that resentment will show up. Sometimes it'll show up, and sometimes, the parent may be like, listen, I never got to do this. I support you, you do it. I wish somebody would have supported me. Now, if a parent does that, they have addressed their trauma and realized how it showed up in their lives and have done what they needed to do to heal from it so it doesn't repeat itself. The parent that is now repeating the cycle and dismissing their child's wants. It needs to be something different, to do something different, and to have a life of purpose that doesn't fit the mold of what the so-called legacy is. That is a parent that has not addressed their trauma. Now, let me back up a little bit quick. It's nothing against doctors and lawyers. Okay, I'm just using it as an example. There are people that listen. Being a doctor and a lawyer has always been their passion. They find purpose in that. Whatever the profession is, this is just an example. You don't want to be the person that dismisses something different that your child wants to do just because you didn't get a chance to do it. Address your trauma, heal from it, be accountable, and support the person that decides to do it differently. I can go on and on and on. I have so many stories, like my own proven facts, that this is what trauma does and the effect that it has. And because of how early it starts, it really, really does affect everything if it continues to go unaddressed. And not to say that when it is addressed, it won't still affect things, but you can kind of better have a handle of how it affects your life, and hopefully in a positive way if you do the work and you heal from it. Like I have stories about abuse in families, and you would think that a parent that has been molested, right, doesn't speak about it. Here's their child say, I was touched by whoever, right? The parent hears the child say that. You got parents that will dismiss that and say that didn't happen to you, or it was your fault that happened to you. They're not saying that because that's what they truly believe. Or I wouldn't say that's not what they truly believe, because they could possibly believe that. But they're not just saying that just to inflict a lifelong amount of pain and trauma onto their child. But there's a reason. The answer, like I said before, 100 times before that it's happened, the answer is that parent was dismissed too. And that resentment came up. That resentment cut so deep, like I said in the earlier example, that they can't hear their child's pain over their own. They were told that it was their fault. So now they're telling their child that it's their fault, that it happened to them. That's how bad it can get. That's how bad it has gotten in people's lives. When they don't address the trauma, you continue to repeat the cycle, not in just your children's life, but even in your own life. You kind of find yourself in situations, like I said before, just never feeling fulfilled, no matter how many accomplishments you accomplish. If you never give yourself permission to speak your trauma out loud, address it, and heal from it. So I'll talk to you about how in different scenarios we can recognize that there's some trauma behind what people do, the decisions that they make, what they acknowledge, what they don't acknowledge. There's a reason for every action. There's a reason for every choice that is made in life, good or bad. There's a reason for it. So now let's talk about ways we can heal from our trauma. Number one, recognize it. Go back to how early it starts and see how it shows up in your life. If you can't go to sleep without a nightlight at 45, you have some unaddressed trauma there, right? If you've been working the same dead-end job for like 10 years or more, you hate it, there's some unaddressed trauma there. If you feel as though you're the only one that have problems, but yet you find yourself in the same situation time and time again, and you feel like nobody else has the amount of problems that you do, and your life is the worst, you have some unaddressed trauma there. If you're in relationship with someone, friend, family member, spouse, partner, and you continue to allow these people to disrespect you and not acknowledge you and continue to make you feel small, there is some unaddressed trauma there. If you feel the need to constantly make somebody feel small, there's some unaddressed trauma there. Many different scenarios for you constantly doing something the same way and expecting different results and getting pissed off when you can't get the result that you want when you're doing the same thing. You don't feel like doing nothing different. There's an issue that needs to be addressed. So, first step, of course, admitting that there is some trauma there. Admitting that it exists. I know there's a lot of shame with people who, have this perception of what strong is, and they have this view and this perception that I don't want to see, or I don't want to let anybody see me break or see that anything gets to me. You have to let that go, because it takes way more strength to acknowledge that you've been hurt than it does to ignore that you've been hurt. It takes way more power and courage to acknowledge that you're hurt and that you've been wronged than it does to dismiss it. Dismissing it is the fast track to nowhere. Another thing you can do, another step you can take, is debunking the lies you have told yourself to survive not addressing the trauma. Okay? The perception that allows you to not only dismiss yourself, but to dismiss others when you see the same thing happen to them. Like, have you ever been that person that said, it happened to me, I'm fine, you'll be good. And just boom, no explanation what you did. Or the explanation is short, I just got over it. No, it still shows up in your life. Trust. If you can't sit there and have a conversation about the full story about what happened to you and how you got through it, not just say, well, just get over it, or I got over it, you haven't done the work to truly heal from it. Lastly, there's definitely way more tips, but lastly, because I know this podcast is very long because it's a deep topic and an important topic, so forgive me and love me at the same time. Find out the why. Find out why this is a reoccurrence in your life, or this still affects you, or why did this happen? The truth. Check the facts about your traumatic situation. Don't just result to, I deserved it, or it was my fault, or whatever you told yourself to just get over it. But debunk it and find out the why. Ask questions that you've never asked before. Talk to people who have gone through similar situations. Talk to your parent about, the traumatic experience that you had. Talk to the person who dismissed you, who is still in your life, about what was it that this person couldn't be receptive to you in your time of need. And forgive yourself for whatever happened. Whether you truly feel like you inflicted it on yourself, inflicted it onto someone else, whatever the case may be, forgive yourself for it happening. And that will grant you an opportunity to change and use whatever situation you've been through to help someone else. Whatever type of trauma it is. It could be, man, I really hurt somebody and I didn't mean to, or man, I never got over this breakup and I feel like I keep attracting the same person. Forgive yourself for that. You have a right to hurt. You have a right to change and do things differently. And it's not to be a shameful thing to have feelings and to have emotions, because you're a human being. Allow yourself to feel something and to heal from it. Now, I know You didn't think I was going to leave you without giving this wonderful step to healing from your trauma. You already know what it is. Get a therapist or a life coach. Absolutely wonderful tool. Okay, definitely when it comes to finding out the why and healing and coping with your trauma. Wonderful solution to that. And no, there's like no trauma too small or no trauma too great that a life coach or a therapist wouldn't be able to assist you in some way towards your healing, especially if you are sitting down with a life coach or a therapist that is giving you their undivided attention, that has no bias towards you, that is culturally competent and aware and empathetic. Man, it does wonders for your growth and your healing process to just have somebody just listen and validate you in ways that maybe the person that you've always wanted it from can't do at the time, but somebody is able to give you that and give what you've been through, your trauma, a voice and a chance to be healed, to co-sign that permission that you deserve to have a better life and to not allow your trauma to come back and rob you of everything you've worked so hard for. In conclusion, I really hope that I was able to give you some insight and educate you and empower you when it comes to this whole discussion about trauma and the importance of you understanding, recognizing, and healing from it and the benefits that it has, so that when you get to where you're trying to go, like I said before, you can truly enjoy it, truly feel fulfilled, and not feel like you're unworthy of everything you've worked so hard for in the end, and that you can be an empathetic individual, a thoughtful individual, and have purpose in everything that you do and touch lives on the way. Impact lives in a positive way while you're heading towards your ultimate dreams, goals, and your purpose. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. And don't worry, there's going to be plenty more situations that, I'll be bringing to you guys, so to educate you and so that you can relate, and hopes that it assists you and it inspires you and motivates you to give yourself permission to do whatever it takes to be mentally, spiritually, emotionally, all around better than you were the day before. Thank you for tuning in and trusting this podcast to enlighten you. The Live and Be Great podcast will be airing every other Friday. If you have truly enjoyed this podcast, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving Live and Be Great a chance. Please feel free to share, like, give a review, subscribe on whichever platform that you're listening to right now, on iTunes or Apple Podcast, Spotify, Anchor, as well as Google Play. The Live and Be Great podcast is strictly crowdfunded, so if you are interested in becoming a supporter, you can click the link in the description, or you can go to liveandbegreat.com and scroll to the bottom and donate to the Live and Be Great podcast today, so I can continue to give you good and motivational content. Thank you all for listening, and don't forget to give yourself permission to live and be great.